How you doing, Facebook? I'm online to tell you about why I love my book, the KJV Bible. There's no other book out there like it. And if we were looking at the front page, I think it was the second page, if you get an old enough KJV Bible, there would be some wording, and that wording would state that it was translated out of the original tongues and former translations, diligently comparing and revived. So what they're saying is tongues and translations before the King James came about. Now, most people tell you that the tongues were the Hebrew was in the past, Old Testament, and Greek was in the future, New Testament. But anybody that's educated on their Bible would know just by reading the Bible that there were more than just Greek people in the Bible. As a matter of fact, the 12 apostles were not Greek. They were actually Jews, which came from the Hebrew tribe. So if they were to be speaking anything, they would be speaking Hebrew. And another point, the book of Hebrews, nobody would send a letter to Hebrew people in Greek. I mean, who would be able to read it? If you send a letter, you would send a letter in Hebrews. I believe that's why a lot of people are saying they don't know who wrote the book of Hebrews, and my guess would be a Hebrew. I mean, it makes sense. If you got a letter to the Americans, if somebody from out of state, out of the country, sent a letter to America, and they sent it to someone in America, they wouldn't send it in a foreign language. They would send it in your language, especially if they was American. And if these epistles came from the 12 disciples themselves and from those who followed them, which were in Jerusalem, it stands to reason that they would be Hebrew. And another thing, the languages that they're talking about, there were 3 languages written on the cross. When they wrote King of the Jews, they wrote it in Hebrew, they wrote it in Greek, and they wrote it in Latin. Now, why is there only one translation, which is Greek, when in the Bible it said that they wrote in 3 languages? So if there was 3 major languages out there, you think there would be 3 major translations out there? Obviously, the Greek came, according to historians, 300 years after the disciples lived. But they don't know what was used between that 300 and some year period. Now, I have a theory, and I'm gonna let you in on the theory. If you were poor back in that day, you would not be able to afford the most expensive paper that was around. You'd probably be using the cheapest. And if you're using the cheapest, it probably wouldn't last that long. So, what a lot of things that were translated back then were passed on probably to other cheap paper and cheap paper. The expensive paper would probably be for those who can afford it. Now, I looked online for the papyrus and the different papers like that. They were not cheap. I think they quoted an equivalence of $11,000 just a page. So if you were poor, I can't see you coming up with $11,000 to make a Bible, and you have all those pages to fill the New Testament. It's a lot of money. Something to think about. I believe that the KJV translators had more to work with than what we do in this modern day. Now, let me make myself clear. If you're using cheap paper that was constantly being rewrote on cheap paper and cheap paper and cheap paper, and you put it into a Bible so that the common people could read, why would you continue writing on cheap paper and cheap paper and cheap paper when there's a Bible that's printed? So I believe that's what happened. I believe there was Hebrew texts that the KJV writers used. I believe there was Latin texts that the KJV writers used. I believe there was languages that the KJV writers used that were on cheap paper. And then you have the Bibles that were before them. You have the or they call it the bishop's Bible and this Bible and that Bible, and they compared it. They compared those Bibles, they compared the languages that were written, and that's how they came up with the KJV. Now, a lot of people are saying that the KJV only uses Greek, but nowhere in the KJV it says it only uses Greek. And in Hebrew, it said languages. Now, other Bibles say Greek and Hebrew, but the KJV don't say that. So how can people make that point when the writers themselves said languages, and then they said former translations, and they said compared, they said diligently? This is just my view on things, and this is what the Lord revealed to me. You cannot take another Bible and go before someone and explain the Trinity. Why? All of the Bibles, 1 John 5:7 is deleted. They just take half of 1 John 5:8 and cut it in half, and you show put one on 7 and one on 8. But only in the KJV, or maybe in the new KJV, you have 1 John 5:7 preserved. And why is it preserved? Because that's how the writers preserved it. They didn't put it in parentheses like, this is something they added. They put it out plainly like this is a documentation that they read. A documentation that I personally believe that was written on cheap paper after cheap paper after cheap paper, constantly copied over until it got to where it was on a printing press. Once it's on a printing press, it's no need to write anymore on cheap paper. Once again, look in the New Testament. Peter said to the man that was at the gate, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give to you." Now, if he said it to the man at the gate, how are we being told a piece of paper that nowadays, if you were equivalent to nowadays price, it stated it was 40. I forget what the denomination was, but it was a huge sum of money. I mean, even nowadays, nobody poor would be able to afford to write like that on preserved paper that lasts 2,000 years. It's just not practical. You're not going to be able to do that unless you put it under some type of glass, keep vacuuming the air out, and constantly keep monitored at a certain temperature. Other than that, it just, the paper we use now, it just won't work. I know 2,000 years. Okay, I just had to share that. God bless everybody.